Repeating what my colleagues have said, I just want to point out one thing about the proposal, though I haven't actually seen the budget trailer bill language, but looking at your committee's consultant's analysis for your agenda package, it refers to item number 3 in the listing as that any project that has an EIR completed within 1 year after the enactment of the proposal would be exempted from challenge. So even projects in the 5th year would have at least a 4 or 5 year old EIR and would be waived from any legal action consideration.
It's an odd way of doing it. Okay.
Paul Mason with Pacific Forest Trust, and I agree with everything that's been said. It's a terrible proposal, and I would just flag the argument that you still go through the EIR process, it's sort of similar, just doesn't hold true at all if you know at the beginning that regardless of how bad a job you do, how inadequate your mitigation is, there's no legal recourse for anybody. Makes the whole thing a sham. If you're doing an EIR for the peripheral canal or high-speed rail, and you know no matter how bad it is, it's going to go forward without legal challenge, the whole thing becomes a farce.
Is that, in fact, the governor's proposal? I didn't even get that part of it before. That you would pick, before the EIR is done, you would pick which projects are the ones which will not have court supervision?
You can.
That makes it, that is very odd.
The proposal, as specific in the language, specifies that, let me read it first.
I mean, it'd be sort of one thing if you said the EIR is done, and we've decided, sort of, if you will, using the stadium model, which wasn't great, but okay. But just if you assume that model, the EIR was done. There was a dispute about whether it needed a supplemental EIR.
No, I think the section that he's referring to is Section 3, and it says if an environmental impact report of a project selected pursuant to this subdivision is not certified within 12 months.
But why would you pick a project to be in this program before the EIR is certified is the question.
It isn't fair.
How would you have any sense that you are avoiding a frivolous lawsuit if you haven't even seen the certified EIR?
I don't believe that that's the intent.
Did you?
The language that I saw, what they were thinking when they wrote it, it appears, is they were trying to tie it to when you enacted this and keep it on a very strict timeline as to when they did the hearings, when they approved projects, et cetera. So what they did is they said the EIR has to be completed and certified within a year, essentially, of when this law is enacted. But then they expanded it. So they didn't tie it to when necessarily the EIR is completed. It's just and that's why there's alternate projects.
Right.
So it's not just 125 projects. There's also another 100 alternate projects in case you don't complete it and get it certified.
But I guess what I'm getting at is the choice of which project is on the list, just assuming one were to create such a list, is made prior to the certification of the EIR.
It can be either way. You could already have done EIR now, or you could say, I'm going to get it done within a year.
That's a little odd. Okay.
Yeah, it's even worse than the stadium situation.
That is, no, I mean, just makes it even more odd. Okay. Senator Leno.
Just curious, is there anyone in the room here who's here to support this, who could tell us from their professional experience how this would help the state move projects forward reasonably and create more jobs?
This is your role, Bob.
Yeah.
Next.
All right.
All right. No, not him. Okay. He was on a city council. They get their choices. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. I know the auditor is here, and I think she was here to talk on the next issue. Thank you very much. Did you get to your other meeting in the morning? We said she didn't have to be here, but we went so long that she got back. All right. Finance, LAO. Briefly, we heard, members, some of us heard this in JLAC yesterday, so for those of you who are here to talk about this, I'd ask you to appreciate the fact that we've been here 4 hours and none of us have eaten. Okay. Except for Ms. Negretti McLeod, but we won't leave her alone. Yes, ma'am, go aid. No, I know you were here. I said we haven't eaten except for you.
No, I ate. Just for the Southern California people, the flights have been canceled until 6 o'clock.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
That's why most of us we're patient with how long this hearing was taking, and I appreciate members being here. But all of us from Southern California, all our flights have been canceled because of the wind. Oh. So we have a little more time than we hoped.
If you have to be here, you have to be.
That's right. So, down south. Yeah, well, there's that. Okay. Thank you very much. I guess, yeah. Go ahead, Ms. Howell.
Should I start? Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I'll try to keep this brief. We conducted an audit at the request of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee of the State Energy Program. The reason the committee selected this particular program to be audited is because it's a program that traditionally in California receives a small amount of federal money. In the past, the State Energy Program would receive approximately $3 million on an annual basis in federal funds. Through the Recovery Act, through ERA, California was awarded $226 million for the State Energy Program, so significant influx of dollars into California for this particular program. So we were asked by the Audit Committee to get into the Energy Commission early, take a look at what controls they have in place, what processes they have in place to administer this particular program. We issued a report on December 1st and had some concerns, and I'll highlight those very quickly. One of the concerns we had is the progress that the Energy Commission had made to date. At this point in time, they had awarded a couple of contracts, one to the Department of General Services, the other to the Employment Development Department. Those totaled approximately $40 million. Out of the $226 million, there were also some loans awarded, about $11 million in loans, but still there's a significant amount of funds that need to be obligated by the Energy Commission by September of this year. In looking at their control processes, we felt that they needed to strengthen their internal control processes and make sure that they had established controls to allow them not only to administer the awards, execute the contracts, but then monitor these projects once they commence after the awards the contracts are executed. Let me flip a page real quick here. And the Energy Commission had, at the time we issued the report on December 1st, had issued a couple of RFPs to hire some outside expertise to assist them in assessing their controls and certainly to conduct monitoring. And it's my understanding, based on a recent response, they're in the process of evaluating those RFPs. So in a nutshell, recommendations that we made to the Energy Commission is they need to quickly perform actions they had planned. They need to get a consultant in there very quickly to do an assessment of the controls, make the necessary improvements, hopefully before a lot of the funds are awarded and these contracts are executed, so you have your controls in place before the money starts flowing. So that needs to happen very quickly. Another area that we had concerns about was their ability to report information to the federal government. There are very specific reporting requirements in the Recovery Act. It's Section 1512. You've probably heard that terminology in the past, or that section referred to. It not only requires reporting related to jobs created, jobs retained, but other fiscal information as far as expenditures, et cetera. So we felt that they really needed to continue to work on developing the capacity to be able to collect the data, verify the accuracy of the data, and then report it to the federal government. Again, strengthening controls to mitigate any fraud, waste, and abuse, and then promptly solicit proposals and execute contracts so that the money starts flowing. Again, as I said in my opening comments, at this point there's only been $40 million contracted for with DGS and EDD. Those two entities hadn't yet executed further contracts or awards at the time we issued the audit report. So there's still time, but the time frame is very narrow. They have to have all of these funds obligated by the end of September of this year. Otherwise, California risks losing funds. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Ms. Douglas, I know everybody has your packet. It was a very good presentation, but yesterday's was longer than we have. You will keep attention for here today. So if you want to highlight some of those things that have resolved some of those issues, how they're resolved, and what your prospects are. I mean, I think the reason this is on the agenda, members, this is not a governor's proposal. It's our request, just like on the transportation era funds, to make sure in the context of the February concern that all of us have to get jobs and the economy moving, so that we can try to hope that our budget problem in 10-11 is not as bad as anticipated, that we make sure we're not having any problems in state agencies that are blocking this money from being used, that are stopping it from happening as quickly as we might create jobs, and also that put us in position to apply appropriately for any new funds that the federal government may propose, that we're sure that we're in compliance and we're doing everything we need to do to get it out, not lose it, and be able to with with good credentials, if you will, apply any next round. So,
Thank you.
Ms. Douglas, thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Ducheney, and I do recognize that a couple of the members have heard the whole presentation. I will not go through the whole presentation. I will offer that any member of this committee that would like me to meet with them and talk in more detail about our programs, I'd be very happy to do so. I offered meetings to all of the members of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. I didn't have the opportunity to do that with this committee, but I'd be happy to. Very, very briefly, the Energy Commission is administering over $300 million of federal funding through the federal stimulus funds. The largest program that we're administering is the state energy program. That's $226 million, and as the state auditor correctly stated, it's an enormous increase from the historical average of that program, which is typically between $1 to $3 million. So we had to move forward and implement new programs in order to expend most of this money. Cutting to really the bottom line, every single one of the new programs that we have put forward to spend the state energy program money, we project encumbering all of the funds, every dollar, by 3 months before the federal deadline to spend the money, in some cases significantly before that. We have a $25 million revolving loan program we've established at the Department of General Services. The Department of General Services has already put together $3.7 million in loans to retrofit 5 state buildings. They are signing 5 more loans for more than $12 million in the first quarter of 2010. All $25 million will be loaned in June of 2010. So that's all of the funds encumbered 3 months before the deadline. Over half of that encumbered 6 months before the deadline. We also put $25 million in a revolving loan fund that the Energy Commission administers for local governments, public agencies such as cities, counties, sewer districts, water districts, and so on. We have encumbered. We expect to encumber all of the funds 6 months before the September 30th deadline. $9.6 million is already encumbered 8 months or more ahead of the deadline. We put $20 million into the state energy program, Clean Energy Workforce Training Program. We awarded $15 million to EDD. They put together additional money, a total of $53.4 million, so over 3 times leverage over 3 times what we initially put in the pot. EDD put the money out through a competitive solicitation that they administer. We funded 37 regional partnerships of workforce investment boards, community colleges, and private sector entities providing training to unemployed workers up and down the state. The EDD money was encumbered almost a year in advance of the deadline. We noticed, and I have a map in your packets, this is slide 10, you'll see a big donut hole in the Central Valley where no proposal was successful in the EDD solicitation. We found that problematic given the high unemployment rate in the Central Valley. So the Energy Commission worked with EDD and the California Workforce Investment Board to put together a training partnership in Fresno and apply for Department of Labor funds. We learned yesterday morning that the application was successful, and $6 million for training of unemployed workers will be brought to the Fresno area through this partnership. This is Department of Labor money. We don't directly administer it. We just helped put the application together. We allocated $5 million to the Employment Training Panel. They added another $3 million to that. That is scheduled for Energy Commission business meetings on January 29th and February 26th. The ETP money will be encumbered about 9 months in advance of the federal deadline.
Well, wait a minute. We're already past 9 months in advance of the federal deadline, so the federal deadline September 2010?
Yes.
That would be 8 months from now.
Well, the business, essentially, in this case, the money's encumbered at the business meeting. It goes out of ETP on a first-come, first-served basis to employers.
Oh, okay. So you've given it to ETP? So then it's obligated under our...
No, it's on our
Is it
business
obligated at the
meetings.
point we give it to ETP?
It's obligated at the point at which the commission votes it to ETP. It's scheduled for 2 business meetings, the January 29th and February 26th.
I see. Okay, that's what we...
I said about 9 months in advance.
I'm sorry, January and February. So the next
Yes.
couple meetings,
Yes.
that money will be obligated in
That's
theory
right.
to ETP. Okay.
That's right. State Energy Program competitive money, we have a $110 million competitive solicitation for energy efficiency. It includes municipal financing, municipal and commercial building retrofit, and we received over 100 proposals for $850 million. Proposal review and evaluation is underway. We expect to issue a notice of proposed awards in February 2010. And so we're looking
Now,
at...
and to get back to this, if it's the proposed awards, will that be like an obligation? No.
No, the NOPA is not the obligation. It's when the proposals are scheduled at the business meeting, which we're looking at being in the April timeframe,
Okay.
which is 5 months ahead of the deadline.
Okay.
We are establishing a $35 million revolving loan fund for clean energy manufacturing, partnering with business transportation and housing. This is the only program where the guidelines are not yet final, but we have a quick process for making them final because they're an amendment to existing state energy program guidelines that we've just put in place. This money is projected to be encumbered 3 to 4 months before the deadline, depending on how many proposals we get and how long the ranking process takes. The only additional money, it's in the range of $3 million, and I have in my paperwork how much. We have some money set aside for implementation of AB 758. This is a sweeping, comprehensive retrofit bill that was passed by the legislature last session. This is in the governor's budget, and it includes both contract funds and personnel funds. So we will have to time, the personnel will be considered encumbered when the budget is passed. We will have to move quickly to encumber the contract funds, and that's additional to what I've presented so far. I'm shifting gears now and talking about our administration and support. So now we're going into staffing and contracts. There are really only 2 important points that I'd like to cover. On staffing, we requested and the legislature approved 14 positions overall for the Energy Commission to administer ARA funding. 9 of those...
These limited term because it was
yes,
ARA?
they're all limited term. 9 of them are for the state energy program. We quickly put together a staff team. We have been assigning people when we need them. We have reached a point at which for the last at least 3 months, we have 50 people or more equivalent working full-time on this program. It's because the workload is tremendous. It hits our contracting office very hard. It hits our legal office. Every single policy, every single division in the Energy Commission is contributing staff to this effort. We have the message loud and clear from the legislature, the governor's office, and from our own commitment to successfully execute on this program that we need to do what it takes to get the money out the door as quickly as possible. And so
Well, and not just to throw it out the door so that it's like used for something and does something useful too. I mean, it would be nice.
That's absolutely right, Senator, and I skipped that slide, but as you know, yesterday I talked about the Energy Commission's principles for administering ARA, and if I have time, and if you would like, I'll go back to that before I conclude the presentation. So that I covered staffing. In terms of the auditing and measurement verification and evaluation contracts, I will say that we agree with the state auditor's recommendation that we need to improve our internal controls between, I would say, between fiscal year 2006-2007, where Energy Commission pass-through money totaled $328 million, to 2009-10, where it totaled $813.8 million with ARA and the new AB 118 program combined. the amount of money that we administer and pass through more than doubled. So we need to establish new controls that are commensurate with the responsibilities that we're currently administering. We began this work by contracting with a company called Cambria to help us develop reporting protocols for the distinct OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and Department of Energy reporting. There are different requirements. We need to help our subrecipients report correctly, and so we began with that. In July, we met with representatives from the Department of Energy auditing branch. They stressed to us the need for a far more robust system of internal controls than we had. They reminded us that the Federal Stimulus Act carries additional requirements even beyond what we normally associate with federal grants. And they advised us to get a top-notch auditing contract going with one of the very top firms to assist us in complying with requirements. And so in August, we conducted a market survey with firms who had experience with auditing and oversight at the federal and state
Dan,
level.
we don't need it by timeline, sorry.
Okay.
I just don't want to, I don't want to cut you off too much, but we're losing folks as we speak, and I just, bottom line here, LAO, finance, auditor, everyone, what does everybody think about what they're doing now and whether it will timely comply with what we need it to comply with? I mean, I guess, we get that they've done things. They are now out for this bid. Cross our fingers that bid comes out in a certain time, but is there a way we can track this, and who's going to be in charge of that between all three of you?
One of the things we can do, Senator, is whenever we issue an audit report as a member of JLAC, you're familiar, we require responses from the agency periodically. The 60-day, and they gave us a 45-day. The 60-day is due February 1st. Okay. But a 6-month response will be due to us June 1st, which would be relatively shortly after some of those timelines they expect to meet as far as the awards in April and May. So hopefully the Energy Commission will report to us on June 1st that they've been able to meet all their timelines. If not, we would be able to bring that to the legislature's attention, and there would still be some time left
for the budget, and we could reallocate if we had to.
Right. I mean, the other option would be to have the Energy Commission report to us earlier than that, but the June 1st timeline may work because they're indicating that many of their awards will be accomplished by April and May.
March and April. And
right.
Yeah. Does that jive with what you think in terms of that you probably will have your, let's assume, if everything goes according to plan, you would have your audit firm in place, you would have all the guidelines in place for the newer programs, and have obligated the money to ETP and a couple of the others, right, by then? Karen?
Absolutely. We would be happy to report on any date. June 1st makes sense to me.
Well, from my perspective, I mean, I understand that June 1st is kind of the natural. It'd be really nice if we all had it a little before May revise, whenever that falls. I mean, just so that any issues are, see where you are maybe on May 1st or something.
We'd be happy to give.
Just so that if there are any issues, you still have a little time. And I think, this isn't, statute, but I think it would be helpful to everybody if we saw where we were on May 1st. If we see on May 1st that it looks like we're on track to obligate everything we need to by September 30th in a way that's appropriate and for good projects, and we're not having issues with the contract, then we'll all know that, and finance will know it as they're doing their May finance letters, and if there were any need to reallocate or do anything different, we would have the opportunity to do that. And does that seem fair to everybody? If it works for the commission, I think that would be.
Would you like us to report to the committee on May 1st or to the auditor on May 1st?
Everybody. Maybe it'd be one to everybody. I mean, if you would, why don't you do it to JLBC? That's the simple way out of this. To the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, which pretty much hits a lot of folks here, gets it to the LAO, Finance gets one, and the auditor should receive a copy, which she normally wouldn't always be in that loop, but throw her in, and then we'll see where we are. That's fair. I mean, just kind of a status report.
Yeah. We'd be happy to do that.
Would be appropriate.
And not so much a question, just a couple of comments. Yeah. We'll also, on the policy committee side, be tracking this. We're vetting out our schedule and series of informational hearings, so here you go. This is going to be one of them, so that we continue to stay on top of it between now and April, May, and June. Number one. Number two, I'm just surprised because we have been hearing, either through the informational hearing we had last year, others in the building that have observed the capacity concern that we talked about a little bit today, definitely talked more at length yesterday in JLAC, when the Commission and its programs and its staff is ramping up from $3 million worth of work to more than $200 million worth of work, the ability to handle it all. And to not see in the governor's proposed budget any requests that would reflect that scaling up challenge and capacity concerns. So I'm not saying we will, I'm not saying we won't reflect that by the time the legislature wraps up its budget, either mid-year or fiscal year.
Senator, we did not request additional resources for the stimulus work, in part because it's limited term and we expect to have a lot of it wrapped up by September. To be completely honest, when I say wrapped up, it really just shifts, and it shifts from allocating the money to managing contracts and managing verification. And so I will go back to staff and I will ask them to provide any new estimate we may have going forward of what that will actually
That's why the May revised date
okay.
is the appropriate date, because then finance gets it. If there are issues with, perhaps we shouldn't furlough everybody on these funds. Hate to be a broken record.
Exactly.
And they could be allowed, do their job, and therefore these funds would be expedited. But if there are issues with expediting or oversight, limited terms, lengthening limited terms, thinking about how to do it or what positions are necessary,
and
what's happened with your contract, whether you can fund it with ARA funds, those kinds of things.
Okay.
And as we discussed yesterday and today, some of the work is ongoing. You just pointed that out, yet again. Two, not to get into the details of the programs, but when it's a loan versus a grant program, the way you pitched it in committee was it over time gets paid back and you can reuse those dollars for future, greening efforts. So there is an ongoing element to this. It's not all one-time work.
There are two ways in which this is ongoing. One way is managing these contracts through to completion and the measurement, verification, and reporting that comes out of that. And secondly, you're absolutely correct. The funds that are in revolving loan programs, at least two of the three, will revert back to the Energy Commission, or we make a programmatic or policy decision to establish longer-term mechanisms at the entities that are administering the funds. So one way or the other, this does not go away.
That's good. Okay. And maybe somebody could, at some point, probably not this year, but next year, figure out how much energy savings we get out of some of these programs, which would be, we're saving money in the general fund by getting these programs and getting our buildings sealed up or whatever it is we're doing, changing the light bulbs and such.
Senator, we're tracking energy savings. The Department of Energy has formulas for energy savings and jobs created. We are also tracking actuals, so we'll have at least fairly accurate
Appreciate it.
numbers.
Elio, did you have any comments on this? All right, everybody track it. Let's see what we can figure out where we are by May 1st, and then if it's necessary, that can be heard in subcommittee, or if everybody, Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you
for being here. Anybody in the public want to comment on this issue at all? Thank you.
Very quickly, Victoria Rome with the Natural Resources Defense Council. We're part of the California Green Stimulus Coalition of over 50 groups that have been tracking and weighing in on how the stimulus is spent. And we believe we submitted a letter, which we're happy to provide copies if you don't have, but that the CEC has done a great job actually in holding a good process about how to spend the money in the state energy program, and we hope that they continue doing so. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Justin Milan on behalf of the U.S. Green Building Council and also California League of Conservation Voters. We are signatories to the same letter that went out. Generally, we commend the Commission for doing a great job getting a good mix of projects, a fair process, and we too hope that they'll get the money out the door. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, these should be very short. The Office of Historic Preservation question. This just goes to what we've talked about earlier today, and the reason we again put this on the agenda is really just to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep the economy moving while we're, worrying about what is going to be our end line on the budget. But in the context of the everyone's call for jobs and economy, we want to make sure that we are not bottlenecking our own path to recovery. So it not being the fault of the SHPO that they have no staff. We also recognize that certainly the Inspector General pointed this as a place for a possible bottleneck, so put it on the agenda to see where that is. We also, they've already left the room, we recognize that some of the responsibility goes to CEC, who stole two of your staff fair and square, but nonetheless, we want to make sure we are in a position. So understanding whatever backlog there is, what's happening, what anybody's doing to fix it would be helpful. So I don't know if you finance or Mr. Donaldson.
Thank you. I'm Michael Harris. I'm Acting Chief Deputy Director at State Parks. I've got Wayne Donaldson, the State Historic Preservation Officer, with me. Absolutely, in the interest of time, I can cut right through this, I think, Madam Chair. I'm really happy to report this is a case where our management process has worked and worked well. We saw a problem coming at us, a problem that, frankly, from my narrow parochial view, probably could have been best addressed back in Washington when they began this process, but so be it. We saw that problem coming. We started talking about what we needed to do about it. We did those things, and I can tell you today we do not have any backlog of ERA projects at the Office of Historic Preservation. There is one project outstanding. It's been on our records, I think, for about a year. We have been unable to contact the federal agency that is the sponsor of that project. They're not responding to us despite our best efforts. I don't consider that a backlog.
It's a federal agency sponsor, but then that's not ERA funds.
Actually, I believe it is ERA funds at this point.
Yeah, it's actually the Veterans.
Identify. Sorry.
This is Wayne Donaldson, the State Historic Preservation Officer, and yes, it's Veterans Affairs. They're putting some solar panels on the National Cemetery down near Santa Nella. We keep asking them for more information, and they just not sending us the information. It's only been going on for about 2 months on this, though.
My apologies.
Yeah, but we have a very detailed log when we're trying to get information.
So is the State Veterans Affairs isn't answering you, or the Federal Veterans Affairs?
Federal.
And Madam Chair, it's not our intent to be, throwing stones at other agencies. We're all hammered by a huge workload here, huge increase in workload here. But the underlying point for us is there is no backlog at OHP. We're not holding up any federal dollars. We're not holding up any projects.
I know you we're doing it intentionally. We never, but the question was whether the volume had gotten so. Was it that there were so many different kinds?
There are several pieces to it. First and foremost, I think, was that they enacted the stimulus to be consistent with federal law. Existing federal law requires all federal agencies to consult with the state historic preservation officers on projects which might have an impact on historic resources.
People erred on the side of...
OHP has worked very successfully with several federal agencies over the years. Caltrans acting as a representative of the federal agency is probably our best example. We work very closely with them. They fund positions in our office. We move their projects along. What happened instead was there were a whole bunch of federal agencies that got money from ERA, which had no experience with the Section 106 process. I'll give you just one example. I believe it's actually cited in your agenda, so maybe I won't. But HRSA, it's a federal agency dealing with health, submitted 79 projects to us. We'd never seen a project from them before.
From the health department.
And that's because they never had money to be doing anything that would be affecting us. They never participated in the process. What we did in response to that, what Wayne's folks did in response to that, was go out and educate HRSA.
When you need to send one and when you
what you need to send to us and what you don't need to send to us so that we can get them to do a pre-screening. And we went from having 79 projects from them to having none. And that's one of the key actions we've taken to address the problems we saw coming our way. We've been doing education and outreach to federal agencies and to their subrecipient agencies, some of which are state agencies. Among other things, we've never had a need before for a quick, easy, this project isn't I don't want to say not important, but it's not subject to our concern.
The equivalent of a negative declaration.
Essentially. We now have a form letter for that. That speeds the process, makes it much easier to move forward. We have loaned staff. Caltrans has been very forthcoming. As I said, they're very engaged with us. We have, I believe, 4 positions loaned from Caltrans. We also identified within state parks who, just so we're clear, state parks simply provides administrative support for OHP. But we found 3 qualified people that we are loaning to OHP to help expedite their work. And I guess most importantly, going forward, we're tracking the workload and we're working with the administration and with the Department of Finance, doing all that we think we need to ensure we have adequate positions and staff going forward. That isn't to say it won't be a rocky road. It will, especially if there's a second wave of stimulus funding coming out. But we're committed to following through with what we've done so far, which is let's stay on top of it and make sure we're not hurting anybody and make sure that at the end of the day the state gets every single federal dollar it possibly can.
Okay. Thank you very much. Leo, do you have any comments on this? Mr. Donaldson, did you have anything to finish up? Just keep us, I guess I think just given the concern from before, just if there starts to be an issue again, it'd be just good to let us know in advance before we read it in the newspapers, So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll for sure do that.
All right. Thank you very much. Anybody out there want to comment on this one? Just keep them moving. If you've gotten rid of the backlog, just every time somebody's sending you one, we'll have to just kind of watch this one. Yeah. Okay. Clean water. Oh, sorry. This is you're the clean water folks, right? Okay. Last issue, members. 228. We're doing good. All right. And the room is almost emptied out, so we're good. All right. We will finish at 2:30. Yeah. All right. I think this one is a technical issue, as best as I understand it. Finance.
Madam Chair, Rob Schlendau from Finance. Yes, this is really a technical issue. The federal government, in its most recent appropriation under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, requires that states provide certain forms of basically cost-free loans and grants to entities applying for the program. Typically, the program has provided loans in the past. Last year, when the Water Board received ARA funds, for the first time, the feds required that they provide these sorts of grants and no-cost allocations to various entities. So this year, when they came back, they basically did the same thing. And so last year, we proposed legislation which you approved to allow them to spend the ARA funds. This year, it's essentially the same thing.
So is this a second wave we're already receiving short of any new legislation that's being proposed?
These are Dorothy Rice, Executive Director, State Water Board. These are not ARA funds that are being provided, but rather federal legislation recently passed extending the grant authorization to the base program, so the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. In other words,
the existing program that's been around for a while.
They liked the grant component that was added to the ARA funds and have now extended it to the base program as a standard element. So in order to be fully eligible for the full suite that the program offers, we now need to request that we have authority to issue grants in California so that we can get the full funding from the federal government for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, because it's no longer simply a
pure
loan program. It's now a grant and loan program.
So it'd be a permanent change to the underlying program.
That's what we're requesting.
Last year was a trailer bill change that was only as to the ARA funds, and now I get it. Okay. LAO, comments, thoughts?
Catherine Freeman with the Legislative Analyst's Office. We've reviewed the proposal, and we found that it will not harm the Clean Water Revolving Fund, and we do recommend, just as a bottom line, we recommend approving the trailer bill for this item.
And you have seen the language? Everybody's seen the language?
We've seen language.
All right. Yes. So we'll just make sure everybody's read it up here. And if there is no objection, is there anybody in the public that had comment for or against this language? All right. Hearing none, thank you all very much for your patience and brevity. This hearing is adjourned. We will reconvene on Tuesday afternoon for health, and if you thought this one was long, bring your coffee. All right.
Okay, so health is the next one?